Welcome to the deep dive. We're skipping the usual small talk today.
Yeah, diving right in.
Exactly. Because I want to jump straight into a massive, honestly provocative statement that was just made on the global stage. Quote, "The era of a Western-dominated world is over."
It's a heavy statement.
It really is.
And what makes it incredibly fascinating is, well, who is actually saying it? This isn't some outside critic looking in.
Right.
This is a sitting Western leader, the President of Finland, standing at a podium in India, literally declaring the end of an era.
So for our source material today, we are looking at an excerpt from that keynote speech. It was delivered at the Raisina Dialogue in New Delhi.
Which, for those who follow global policy, you know the Raisina Dialogue has basically become this major platform for strategic geopolitical thinking.
And our mission for this deep dive is to really pull this speech apart. Why is a Western leader declaring the end of Western dominance? And more importantly, what does his proposed alternative actually look like?
Right, because we need to pressure test the viability here, the underlying motivations, the real-world implications of the solutions he's pitching to you.
We can't just take it at face value.
Exactly. When someone proposes tearing down or radically reshaping the entire global order, the immediate questions have to be who really benefits and what are the blind spots?
We're not just nodding along to diplomatic rhetoric today.
Definitely not.
So let's start with his diagnosis of the present. He kicks things off by noting that Finns are known for being pretty cool, calm, and collected. He jokes that when things get tough, a Finn just takes an ice bath.
Which is a great image.
Yeah, and he uses that as a jumping-off point to throw a bit of cold water on how we view the world right now. He argues that human beings make three fundamental mistakes in global affairs.
Okay, lay them out.
First, we over-rationalize the past. Second, we over-dramatize the present. And as a result, the third mistake is we completely underestimate the future.
And he grounds this in a very specific historical anecdote, right?
He does. He mentions reading the biography of U Thant over the holidays. The book is called The Peacemaker.
U Thant, for context, was the Secretary General of the UN from 1961 to 1971.
Yeah.
Think about that decade for a second. The Cuban Missile Crisis.
The Vietnam War.
The Six-Day War. He was the first Asian to hold the role, navigating a world that was constantly on the brink of nuclear annihilation.
And the president says that reading this biography led him to conclude that the number of global crises is actually fairly constant.
Right. He's arguing that observers of international relations tend to look at the past and pretend it was perfectly orderly.
While treating the present as if the world has never experienced crises on today's scale.
But we really have to ask if that framing simply serves to calm the nerves of his audience.
How do you mean?
Well, it's a comforting thought, right? The idea that the world is always a bit on fire, so today's fire isn't uniquely catastrophic.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But does that downplay the severity of what's happening right now? The nature of modern warfare, cyber threats, interconnected global economies? It means a crisis today has a fundamentally different contagion rate than a crisis in 1965.
Which actually brings up the current conflicts he specifically names in the speech. The Middle East, Sudan, and Ukraine.
And to be clear to you listening, we are remaining strictly impartial here. We're simply conveying the president's stated view.
Right, his perspective.
His main worry isn't just the sheer number of local and regional conflicts. It's the very real threat that these specific conflicts are incrementally bleeding outward, that they're becoming global.
He warns that without a functioning world order, power vacuums will inevitably be filled by what he calls raw power, rogue behavior, and predatory hegemonies.
Strong words.
Very strong. But let's evaluate that claim critically. Is this truly a new disruption?
Well, he seems to think the system is breaking down. Right, but for decades, many countries in the global south might argue they have always experienced the global order as a system of raw power and hegemony, often dictated by Western capitals.
Ah, so it depends on where you're sitting.
Exactly. We need to question if the system's actually breaking, or if the illusion of a perfect, benevolent system is just shattering for the West.
That perfectly leads into an analogy he uses regarding the rules-based world order. He pushes back against the idea that the rules-based order is entirely dead.
What's his comparison?
He says, just because someone gets caught speeding, that doesn't make speed limits irrelevant. The fact that international rules are being broken right now doesn't make the whole system null and void.
It's a clever rhetorical device, I'll give him that.
Yeah, it paints a clear picture.
But let's take it to its logical conclusion. If a few people speed, sure, the rules still matter. But at what point do too many speeding tickets mean the system has functionally failed?
Like if everyone is speeding.
Exactly. If everyone on the highway is going 100 miles an hour, totally ignoring the signs, and the police have no jurisdiction or power to pull anyone over.
Then the speed limit doesn't really exist anymore.
Precisely. We have to consider if we are nearing that threshold on the global stage, where the rules exist on paper in UN charters, but hold zero practical authority in actual conflict zones.
So if those speed limits are being ignored, how does the global power dynamic shift in response? The president delivers a blunt message to his own hemisphere. He says, quote, "Our holiday from history is over."
Did he elaborate on the math behind that shift?
He did. The numbers are staggering. He notes that he and the Prime Minister of India standing together on that stage represent almost 1.5 billion people.
Just the two of them.
Right. And he highlights India's massive demographic and economic trajectory, pointing out they're projecting growth rates of 7% all the way out to 2047, while standing as the biggest democracy in the world.
The center of economic gravity is undeniably moving east and south.
And he makes a rather striking admission about the West's posture over the last few decades. He talks about preaching from ivory towers.
Yes, he admits that for a long time, the West got to enjoy relative peace and highly stable supply chains. And from that incredibly comfortable, secure position,
we were handing out advice,
policy dictates, and harsh criticism to nations facing much more volatile realities.
But now, he says, it is time for the West to learn from others, specifically pointing to India's pragmatic worldview.
But is the West actually prepared to do that?
Acknowledging the ivory tower is one thing.
Right. Dismantling it and sharing institutional power is an entirely different proposition. That is the true friction point here.
It's easy to say in a speech.
Exactly. It's easy to praise the global South in a keynote delivered in New Delhi, but it requires a massive ego shift and real political sacrifice for Western capitals to genuinely accept an equal or subordinate role in setting global agendas.
You're talking about relinquishing leverage.
Yes, leverage in trade, technology, and global finance.
Well, he gets quite specific about what the West needs to learn. He suggests it's time we all became, quote, a little bit more India.
What does that strategic posture actually look like in practice?
He's referring to India's strategy of autonomy and multi-alignment.
Multi-alignment, not non-alignment.
Right. During the Cold War, the mentality was very binary. You're either with us or against us. Multi-alignment means you don't rely solely on the goodwill of one partner or bloc.
You spread your bets.
Exactly. You invest heavily in your own domestic security and capabilities, but you actively develop partnerships in every direction simultaneously.
So you might buy defense equipment from one bloc,
Technology from another.
and energy from a third.
He actually uses Europe as an example of a region that's been taught a harsh lesson about passivity, noting that Finland itself realized collective security through NATO was a necessity.
Alongside the economic clout of the EU, of course.
Right. And he points to the recent EU-India strategic partnership and free trade agreements, proof that you can engage actively on trade and strategy without being part of a formal military alliance.
It's a highly pragmatic approach. But the president introduces a philosophical framework to justify this. He calls it values-based realism.
Values-based realism.
Yes, and he references Kautilya's Arthashastra. It's an ancient Indian treatise on statecraft and political science.
Okay.
He notes that thousands of years ago, this text recognized the international system is inherently competitive. It's interest-driven, requiring a ruthless, pragmatic approach to statecraft.
The realism part.
Right. But crucially, it also argued the ruler's ultimate duty was to values and ethics, guided by the concept of dharma.
So he's basically proposing a marriage of raw national interests with democratic principles. He states that Finland stands by its core values, democracy, equality, human rights, but must be ready to engage in dialogue and cooperation with countries that don't necessarily share those values.
This values-based realism sounds incredibly elegant in a keynote speech.
I sense a however coming.
However, when the stakes are existential, when energy security, defense supply chains, or raw economic survival are on the line, can a nation truly balance human rights with cold, hard statecraft?
It's a tough balance.
History shows us that realism often quietly swallows the values when push comes to shove.
You're asking if a government can prioritize human rights while simultaneously cutting massive trade agreements for critical minerals with nations that suppress those rights.
Exactly. It's an incredibly tightrope to walk, and the speech doesn't quite answer what happens when those two forces inevitably collide.
That tension transitions us perfectly into the substantive proposals of the speech. Because the president doesn't just diagnose the problem, he actually lays out a three-part blueprint for a new multilateral order based on this values-based realism.
Let's look at his first proposal, improving representation.
Right. What's the specific formula he puts forward?
He states flatly that the power structures of international institutions reflect the world as it was in 1945, not as it is today.
That's a fair critique.
Very fair. So to fix this, he explicitly proposes reforming the UN Security Council with a specific allocation: 2 permanent seats for Asia, 2 for Africa, 1 for Latin America. And he specifically advocates for India to hold a permanent seat.
He also extends that logic to the global financial architecture, calling for reforms to the Bretton Woods institutions, so the IMF and the World Bank, plus the World Trade Organization, noting that trade is currently being wielded as a geopolitical weapon.
Proposing a permanent UN Security Council seat for India is widely popular in New Delhi, of course.
Naturally.
But look at the feasibility of this proposal. The Bretton Woods institutions were designed to cement Western financial dominance post-World War II.
Right.
The countries that currently hold veto power in the UN Security Council or disproportionate voting shares in the IMF, would they ever willingly dilute their own power to make these changes a reality?
Power rarely surrenders itself voluntarily.
Passing these reforms through the entrenched gridlock of the current permanent members is a monumental task, perhaps an impossible one under the existing geopolitical architecture.
So if restructuring political power is a heavy lift, how does he navigate the distribution of future technological power? That brings us to proposal number 2, technology and AI guardrails.
This is huge.
He calls AI a life-changing technology and makes a very striking point. He describes AI as the first technology that can be seen to have agency on its own.
That phrasing is vital to unpack. Agency on its own.
What does that mean, practically?
Well, we're not talking about a tool like the printing press or the combustion engine. Those require a human operator to make a decision.
You just do what you tell them.
Right. AI has the potential to make autonomous decisions on resource allocation, financial market trading, cybersecurity, and eventually even military targeting.
That's slightly terrifying.
It is. When a technology has agency, whoever controls the algorithm controls the outcomes.
He argues we need common, basic rules that allow for diversity. Specifically so this new tech doesn't simply deepen the digital divide between the developed and developing world. He even quotes the Indian Prime Minister directly, saying, quote, AI will only benefit the world when it is shared.
AI will only benefit the world when it is shared. It's a beautiful sentiment for a global summit.
Well,
But look at the brutal reality of the global market. The companies developing cutting-edge AI are fiercely competitive, multi-trillion-dollar Western entities.
yeah, they aren't charities.
And the underlying hardware, the advanced semiconductors, they're at the absolute center of massive geopolitical trade wars and export controls right now.
So how realistic is sharing proprietary, infinitely powerful AI technology in a climate of intense national security competition?
Exactly. Is sharing just a diplomatic buzzword, or is there an actual enforceable mechanism to compel tech monopolies and sovereign governments to distribute their most lucrative innovations fairly across the global south?
I haven't seen one yet.
Without a mechanism, the AI revolution is highly likely to concentrate power even further into the hands of the few nations that control the compute in the capital.
Which makes his third proposal particularly interesting, empowering regional solutions.
Let's hear it.
He argues that for international institutions to survive, we actually need to strengthen regional integration.
Which blocks does he point to?
He lists major regional alliances: Mercosur, representing South American trade, ASEAN in Southeast Asia, the African Union, the GCC, meaning the Gulf states banding together to leverage their energy dominance, and, of course, the European Union.
Oh,
He makes the point that victims of war and climate change cannot afford to wait for perfect global institutions to reach a consensus. Global phenomena have brutal local impacts, so we have to accept local and regional solutions operating parallel to global ones.
but doesn't this highlight a fascinating contradiction in his vision?
How so?
Think about it. On one hand, he's advocating for a unified, cooperative, multilateral global order with a reformed UN at the center.
Yeah, that was proposal one.
But on the other hand, he's pushing to elevate regional blocs. If every region relies entirely on its own bloc for security, energy, and trade because the global institutions are too gridlocked, doesn't that inherently create the very spheres of interest and fragmented world he warned against earlier in the speech?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Accelerating regional integration might actually be the final nail in the coffin for global multilateralism rather than its savior.
Because if you empower the regions to operate autonomously, the need for a global consensus basically disappears.
Precisely.
Okay, let's look at what the president calls his procedural pitch. After laying out these three massive substantive changes, UN reform, AI guardrails, and regional empowerment, he makes a grand proposal on the logistics of getting this done.
He draws on mid-century history again here.
He does. He reminds the audience that the foundations of the United Nations were built at the San Francisco Conference, and the framework for the global financial system was engineered in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire.
These were specific moments in time, in specific geographic locations where the victors of the Second World War basically designed the modern world.
And his proposal is to create a modern equivalent. He calls for a New Delhi moment.
A New Delhi moment.
Yeah. He suggests that India should gather world leaders in Delhi to begin the process of looking at what happens after the current global conflicts subside, to fundamentally rebalance the world order and agree on common principles.
Pitching a New Delhi moment while standing in New Delhi is an incredible vote of confidence in India's role, propping them up as the indispensable bridge between the West and the global South.
He wraps up this incredibly heavy, high-stakes speech with some notable humor, actually.
Oh, yeah.
He points out that Finns are statistically known as the happiest people in the world for 8 years running, though he jokes you wouldn't necessarily draw that conclusion looking at the faces on a Monday morning tram ride in Helsinki in November.
It's a great juxtaposition.
He contrasts that with Indians, who he points out constantly top global statistics for optimism, the fundamental belief that tomorrow will be better than today.
I like that.
His closing argument is that we need to combine Finnish happiness and Indian optimism to construct a fairer, more stable New World Order.
It's a charming and highly effective rhetorical close for his audience. But as we synthesize the speech in its entirety, we have to evaluate the pitch objectively.
Right. Was this address a realistic, actionable roadmap for global reform?
Or was it a masterclass in diplomatic flattery, perfectly tailored to the host nation?
That's the real question.
Because proposing a New Delhi moment and demanding a permanent UN seat for India guarantees a standing ovation in that room.
Yeah.
But does a speech like this move the needle in Washington, Beijing, or Moscow?
It's debatable.
We really have to separate the diplomatic poetry of values-based realism from the gritty geopolitical reality of how power is actually maintained and exercised.
But that is exactly why we do these deep dives, to look past the applause lines and examine the architecture underneath.
Absolutely.
As we wrap up, let's talk about why this matters directly to you, the listener. A speech given by a European president in India might feel distant, but a shift away from Western dominance fundamentally rewires the global systems you interact with constantly.
It dictates the macro pricing of the global energy markets.
It shifts the regulatory frameworks for the AI tools integrated into your daily workflow.
And it determines the flow of the global supply chains you rely on for technology, medicine, and consumer goods.
Ultimately, it dictates how the next massive global crisis will be managed, and who gets to sit at the head of the table to decide the outcome.
I want to leave you with a final lingering question to ponder based on everything we've unpacked today.
Let's hear it.
We've explored this proposed call for a New Delhi moment and a new global architecture that prioritizes the global South and pragmatic realism. But consider this. If this new room is built and institutional power genuinely shifts away from the West, whose values will ultimately be left out of the room this time around?
That's a profound thought.
No global order is perfect. So in this proposed multipolar future, who becomes the new marginalized voice?
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Keep questioning the consensus, keep looking past the headlines, and we will catch you next time.